All right. It is February 15th. And we are just north of St. Louis, heading south now. Just came through yesterday. And oh boy, was that a hell of a trip. Oh, it worked all fine until, I got north of St. Louis. And then once I got north of St. Louis, I ran into an ice storm, stopped for fuel. Figured I'd let the salt trucks run for a little bit. So I stayed there for about 45 minutes. And then when I left there about 20 minutes later, I ran into a blizzard. So that was fun. Oh, that's maybe I'll tell that story at some point. Yesterday was basically a lesson in how every single thing that could go wrong will go wrong, including like a tire blowout and everything else. So yesterday was interesting. After I did my initial recording, it just kind of all went to hell from there. You just gotta make the best of it, I guess. But either way, I'm parked at a Pilot just north of St. Louis, and this is where I should have been parked last night. Um, but because everything went the way it went, I never made it this far. Never made it even close to this far. So I'm just here now. In fact, after I make this video, I'll make that video. I'll tell you about my day yesterday. I don't know if I'll do it while cruising, because I'm gonna be driving for a few more hours tonight. I still got 6.5 hours of drive time. I don't think I'll drive that out, but you never know. Let's play it by ear. And I'm headed to Fort Worth. So I'm about to bomb down through St. Louis right now. I'm hoping that it's not going to be any issues. I don't see it. It's a Saturday, so I don't see it. Oh, on a side note, today's my birthday. I just stopped at this Pilot, fueled up my truck, and then ran inside and grabbed an Arby's bacon cheeseburger thing. It was like a your birthday. I don't usually eat fast food, um, especially since I put on weight since I've been driving. I need to lose this. But either way, I've got some spooky horror stories lined up again. Some trucker themed spooky horror stories. This one isn't as long as the last one. I purposely went out of my way and picked one that was like, well, this one's 45 minutes. So that should get us through a good chunk of St. Louis. Um, before we run out of video. And so it'll be a little bit of a shorter one if I could ever just shut up and get to the actual driving part. Emma has been pottied. If you don't know who Emma is my clutch co-pilot over here. She's currently under her babies because it is raining out and she got cold and wet not too long ago, so I had to towel her off, feed her, and put her under her babies. And she's kind of pouting a little bit because I wasn't going to linger, but she's only the co-pilot. She's not the pilot, so she doesn't get to decide. And with that, I think we need to hit the road because night ain't getting any younger. So I'm going to key up this video. I'm going to switch over to the big dash. So we don't actually need to see the video. And here we go.
I've been driving trucks for a long time, crossing state lines and navigating more highways than I can even count. I've seen a lot of stuff out there, mostly at night, when the roads are quiet and the world feels like it's slipping into some kind of other place. Especially in the Southwest, there's something about the desert that's just different. The emptiness, the sky stretching out forever, the way the wind seems to carry whispers. I can't explain it, but it's a different kind of place. I've seen people out there too, weird figures just standing in the desert, looking lost or maybe just watching. Sometimes I swear I saw things moving in the shadows, things that shouldn't be moving. Once, I even saw a line of people crawling on their hands and knees along the road, a whole procession of them, stretching out for what felt like miles. That was strange, yeah, but none of it compares to what happened the morning near the border, the morning that changed everything for me. This happened around 2010. I was running a route along the southwestern border, hugging Mexico for a good 100 miles. This stretch wasn't exactly peaceful. Cartel activity was very rampant, and any driver making this route knew the risks. You didn't go in blind. Most of us used the CB radio to keep each other posted on what was going on ahead, sometimes even mile by mile, sharing warnings between each other if things got hot or if there was anything unusual. It was like a little network of survival. Usually it was quiet, just static and long stretches of nothing, but there have been a few times when drivers caught sight of suspicious activity. A couple of trucks with their lights off following way too close, cars speeding without headlights, or even the occasional shootout that you hear about secondhand. But on that night in particular, everything had been pretty still. I wasn't even listening to the radio. I'd made this drive so many times by then that I'd stopped even thinking about it. It was just another route on another night. I had my usual pullouts that I like to use, spots off the radar where I could rest up without drawing too much attention. Not exactly legal parking, but when you're dealing with a potential cartel member, you want to be invisible. This one spot that I like to use was off a dirt road, down a wash between a couple of old, healing billboards, and then into a gully where the truck could fit just right, hidden completely from the highway. It was Arizona, middle of nowhere, the stars bright overhead. A perfect place to grab some sleep. I pulled in and shut the engine down, ate a quick dinner out of the cooler. The air was still, the night was quiet except for the occasional breeze rustling through the desert. I watched the stars for a bit, let my mind drift. Then I climbed into the bunk and settled down for the night. I must have fallen asleep watching a movie, because the next thing I remember, I was being jolted awake by a loud thud. Something had hit my truck, hard. I sat up, blinking in the darkness, and just listened. There's footsteps outside. I moved to the front and slid in the driver's seat, peered out through the windshield. It was dark, too dark to see anything but vague shapes outside. Then the footsteps stopped and I just sat there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The desert went quiet again. I told myself it was probably an animal, a coyote maybe. Then I climbed back into the bunk. I was about to drift off again, and that's when I heard a scream. It sounded like it came way out in the desert, really far off. It was a long, drawn-out scream, like somebody was in real trouble. Then I heard another, and another. It was almost like it was coming closer each time, like whoever or whatever was out there was slowly moving toward me. I sat up again, heart pounding, and listened. After the screams, I heard voices. Too many to count. They were all overlapping, talking over one another. I couldn't make out any of the words. They were far away, distorted by the wind, or just the sheer emptiness of the desert. But the tone of them, it sounded desperate, begging even. And then, as suddenly as it all started, it stopped. And somehow that silence afterwards was worse somehow, like the desert had just swallowed everything up. I don't know why I did it, but I reached up and flipped on the high beams, flashing them 3 times into the night. Maybe I thought it would help whoever was out there find their way. Maybe it was just instinct. The lights cut through the darkness. I couldn't see anything. Just the empty desert stretching out in front of me. I reached for my CB, heart still racing, and called out to anybody nearby. After a few seconds of static, a voice crackled back to me.
"Yeah, I hear you.
The driver said.
See anything out there?"
Nah, but I heard something, I replied. Screaming, people. It sounds like they're in trouble. The other driver was quiet for just a moment, and then in a low voice he responded.
"You want to just stay put, friend. I just got shot at by some assholes driving without headlights. Barely made it out myself. There's cars racing up and down the highway, like they're looking for something or someone. Stay hidden. Whatever you heard, it ain't good."
That definitely wasn't what I wanted to hear. Thanks for the heads up, I said, but I was already feeling that gnawing dread deep in my gut. I signed off and sat there for a few minutes, listening, but the night had gone dead quiet again. Eventually, I climbed back into my bunk, but sleep did not come easy. My mind kept replaying those screams, those voices, the eerie silence that followed them. Something was not right out there, and I didn't want to be around for when it found me. Morning came early, and I wasted no time getting ready to leave. I wanted to be on the road and far away from that spot as quickly as possible. I did my usual pre-drive checks, running through the motions. But when I stepped out of the cab, the first thing that I saw stopped me cold. There, about 20 feet from the truck, was a puddle of dark blood soaking into the sand. It was a big one, the kind that told you something bad had happened out here. My first thought immediately was an animal, obviously. Coyote or some other poor beast that had gotten caught in a fight during the middle of the night. But then I remembered those screams. I walked over to the blood, crouching down to get a better look. There was no tracks around it, no signs of any animals, just blood. I straightened up, feeling a cold sweat prickling at my skin. Just did a really quick sweep of the truck. Everything seemed to be in order, no damage, nothing missing. So I climbed back into the cab and started up my engine, backing the rig out of the gully and back onto the dirt road. And that's when I saw the clothes. At first, I didn't really register what they were, just a few scraps of fabric lying in the dust, like somebody had just tossed them out of a moving vehicle. But as I drove further, I started to see more of them. Shirts, pants, shoes, all scattered along the road. Then there was more blood. A few more pools of it streaking across the ground. It was splattered on rocks and bushes, and then I saw a body, or at least what was left of them. Hands, feet, scalps, pieces of torso, all mixed in with the clothing, like somebody had ripped these people apart and then just discarded them like garbage. That's when the smell hit me, thick and sickening, a mix of blood and rot. I slammed on the brakes with my heart pounding and hands shaking on the wheel. I did not want to keep going. I did not want to see more, but I had no choice. I had to get out of there. I grabbed the CB and called out for help, my voice cracking and barely steady enough to speak. A few other drivers responded pretty quickly, all of them sounding as spooked as I was.
"There's something going on out here,"
one of them said.
"A lot of people got hit last night. It's all over the news. Some kind of execution, cartel shit. They're calling it the Mother's Day Massacre."
My stomach churned. I had heard stories about cartel executions, but this was something else, something worse. I put the truck back in gear and just drove, not looking back and not wanting to see any more of what lay behind me. But the things that I saw, those images, they stayed with me, burned into my mind. The blood, the bodies, the screams in the night. Then something else hit me, something I hadn't noticed until I made it a good 20 miles down the highway. It wasn't just the bodies, the blood, or even the clothing. It was that silence. From the moment that I'd seen those first of those remains, I hadn't heard a single bird, a single insect, not even wind brushing through the cacti. The desert was deathly still, as though the land itself was holding its breath, watching and waiting. The CB crackled to life again, and a voice that I didn't recognize this time called out.
This is Jawbreaker. You still out there? Did you see him?
I didn't answer.
Ah, damn, drivers. You parked on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere and you're hearing screams and all kinds of stuff. And I'd have been, fuck this ELD clock. I'd have been down the goddamn road. I ain't dealing with that shit. Just gonna hang out for the night? No, sir. I got a cold, sore throat, and a cold. The earache's getting better. I had a bad one yesterday. But I got a sore throat and a cold. Been taking my vitamins, so that's why you see me coughing and probably be seeing me blow my nose and use nasal spray and everything else. I'm just trying to survive at this point.
I've been a trucker for most of my life, and while the long hauls are what keep the lights on and the fridge stocked, I don't mind picking up the occasional short run if the price is right. It's not like these jobs are glamorous. Hell, none of them are. But there's something to be said about hitting the open road for a few hours and getting paid more than you would for a whole day's drive. About 6 months ago, I stumbled onto one of these jobs, these quick hauls in a valley community that I barely knew much about. The pay was high, unusually high for such a short run, but I didn't ask too many questions. A trucker learns to keep his head down and his mouth shut, especially when the job's paying better than it should. The first few times it was pretty simple stuff. Raw materials, steel beams, concrete blocks, big bags of gravel, that kind of thing. Always from one end of the sprawling valley to the other. The valley itself wasn't much to look at, just rolling hills covered in dry grass, a few scattered farms, a lot of nothing in between. The towns were small, just rambling communities of a few thousand here and there, so I didn't really spend much time in those areas. I'd show up, grab the trailer, then haul it over to some drop-off lot in McGuire, then call it good. Easy money, no hassle. Over time, I got used to that work and started to learn the routes, even though I was still doing my regular long hauls on the side. These short hauls were just a good way to fill in the gaps, you know? Keep things steady when the big jobs weren't always coming in. One morning, I got a request that was a little different from the others. The email came through like it always did, brief, to the point, and a little vague. This time, though, the instructions were a bit off. The pickup location wasn't your typical warehouse or even a yard. No, this was remote. Unorthodox was the word that they used. The whole haul would be off the grid, they said. No paved roads except for getting out of town. That should have been my first red flag. No name was attached to the request either, just coordinates to where I'd find the trailer. Normally, I'd pass on something that sketchy, but the payout was too good to ignore. Probably some rich local farm out in the boonies that didn't feel like playing by the rules, you know? I've dealt with those types before. Big money, no patience, and a sense of entitlement that made them think they were above the paperwork and formalities, sometimes even above the law. I started thinking that anything could be inside this trailer. Guns, money, drugs. The next day I loaded up my rig and headed out. I followed those vague instructions that I'd been given. The sun was starting to rise. I had that peaceful feeling you get when the road's all yours. Just you and the hum of the engine cutting through the morning mist. The instructions led me out of town, a mile down the county highway before telling me to pull off into this dusty turnout, side of the road. Sure enough, there was a trailer sitting there. No lock, no guard, not even a chain to keep somebody from towing it off in the middle of the night. It was just sitting there in the dirt, like a forgotten piece of junk. I gave it a once over, checked the tires, and made sure everything was intact. The trailer was clean, well maintained, but that really only added to the weirdness of it all. I've hauled enough rigs to know when something feels off, and this felt off. It was intact, undisturbed, and properly handled, so I had no problem hooking it up to my rig and turning it around. The trailer needed to be hauled back through town where I'd drop it off on the other side. Seemed simple enough. The weirdest part was this trailer had 0 markings, which was very odd. As I pulled out on the highway though, something was gnawing at the back of my mind. All the farms were on this side of town, not the other. It didn't make sense. What could I possibly be hauling through town and away from the farmlands? It wasn't like I was delivering to a factory or a warehouse on the other side. Hell, there wasn't much of anything out that way, except for some old mining roads that hadn't seen traffic in years. I scratched my head, running through the possibilities. Maybe it was some kind of black market deal, illegal goods or stolen property. Or maybe I was just overthinking it all. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fishy. The directions led me straight through the heart of town, past those old brick buildings and tired storefronts that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. People were milling about, walking their dogs, grabbing their morning coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that I might be hauling something illegal right in the middle of their quiet little community. The thought of that made my stomach turn, but there wasn't much I could do. Just follow directions at this point. It was then that I realized I could be hauling toxic waste of some kind, maybe even something nuclear. This whole town could be in jeopardy if I made one little mistake. On the other side of town, I picked up an old mining road, just like the instructions said. The further I drove, the worse I felt. The road was narrow, winding through the dense trees and rocky hills. The kind of place that made you question whether you were really going the right way. I hadn't seen a single car since I left town, and there's no cell service out here, so if something did go wrong, I'd be on my own. No number to call, no one to ask for help, just me, my rig, and this damn trailer. The instructions said to look out for a pullout marked with orange cones, and sure enough, after a few miles, I spotted him. The pullout was wide enough for me to offload the trailer without any trouble, and there wasn't a soul in sight. No buildings, no cars, nothing. Just trees and dirt as far as I could see. I pulled that rig in, parked, and got out to unhook the trailer. As I walked around the back of the rig, I noticed the trailer was unlocked. No padlock, no seal, nothing. Now that was unusual. Most loads were locked up tight, even for short hauls. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd take a quick peek inside. After all, if I was hauling something illegal, I had the right to know, didn't I? I swung the doors open and immediately regretted it. That stench hit me like a punch to the gut. Some kind of rotting meat, thick and rancid. I gagged, covered my mouth with my sleeve as I looked inside. The trailer was packed full of meat, raw cuts, slabs of beef, pork, even poultry, all stacked haphazardly on the metal racks. This wasn't a refrigerated trailer though. That meat was spoiling, oozing blood and fat onto the floor in these thick, greasy puddles. I slammed the door shut with my stomach turning over as the image burned itself into my brain. The hell was this? The smell lingered in my nostrils as I unhooked the trailer and climbed back into the cab. I sat there for a minute, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what was going on. Why would anybody haul meat like that, knowing it would spoil within hours? And why here in the middle of nowhere, when nobody could possibly pick it up in time? None of it made sense. I drove back the way I came, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. By the time I got back into town, I'd convinced myself that it was somebody else's problem now. I did my job. I delivered the trailer. I get paid. End of story. But that night as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it all. The smell, the meat, the weird instructions. Something about it all was just weird, like I was missing a piece of a puzzle. The next day I checked my bank account and sure enough the payment had gone through. But it wasn't from some local farmer or business. No, it was from a government account. That's when the unease really started to set in. Why would the government be paying me for a haul like that? What the hell were they doing with the trailer full of rotting meat out in the middle of nowhere? I couldn't let it go. I had to know what happened to that trailer, what I'd really been hauling. I grabbed my truck, my normal Chevy, and drove out to where that pullout was where I left it. The cones were still there, but the trailer was gone. I climbed out and walked around. I found some tracks, deep tire marks in the dirt leading away from the pullout and back into the woods. Somebody had come for that trailer, but they hadn't come from town. They'd come from deeper inside the wilderness. I followed those tracks as far as I could, winding through the trees and rocky terrain until I came to this old abandoned mine entrance. The tracks led straight into the mine, into the darkness, where no truck should ever be able to go. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood there, staring into that jagged black hole, mind racing with all kinds of possibilities. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't something I wanted to be a part of anymore. I turned around and got back in my truck and drove away without looking back once. That was the last short haul I ever took in that valley. To this day, I still wonder what I was really hauling that morning, or more importantly, why.
How about no? He says he does. He said, I did a quick once around. You didn't notice that it was an open trailer that you could have looked right away? What the hell was in the trailer? You didn't notice that until at the end of your trip? That's one downside to these. I mean, there's multiple downsides, but that's one of the downsides to these trucker horror stories is they're written by non-truckers. Like, I couldn't imagine think out picking up a loaded trailer and not checking the seal. It's like trucking 101 to make sure your seal's intact.
The 90s were a wild time. You could go anywhere, do anything, and no one would know where you'd been or what you'd even done. Hitchhiking across the country, people did it all the time. Backpacking through cities, small towns, deserts, forests. There was a freedom to it that just doesn't exist anymore. There weren't cell phones like we have now. No GPS tracking your every move. You could disappear for days, weeks, even months. Nobody would even blink an eye. That's honestly what I loved about it. And at the same time, it's what terrified me the most. I spent most of the time in the 90s on the road, a free spirit, they'd call it, even though I never really thought of myself as that way. I was just a guy who didn't want to be tied down. And if I'm being honest, I was running away from my fears, from the looming threat of technology taking over, and from responsibility. Whatever it was, I was always running. I remember one trip in particular that I've tried to forget for years. I was out in the Nevada desert, the middle of nowhere, and it started the way these stories always do, innocently enough. I'd been hitchhiking for a couple of days. I caught a ride here and there, but I was running low on supplies. No water or food, just the clothes on my back and a backpack with some odds and ends. I'd gotten lucky that morning when a couple had picked me up. They seemed nice enough at first, but somewhere along the way, that changed. Maybe it was something I said, or maybe it was just the heat getting to them. But they got really quiet, exchanged a few glances that made me uncomfortable, and by noon, they pulled over and kicked me out without so much as another word. And just like that, I was stranded in the middle of the Nevada desert. No shade, no relief, nothing but miles and miles of barren land stretching out in every single direction. The sun was the demon overhead, baking everything in sight. I was already feeling lightheaded from the heat, and my mouth was dry as sandpaper. I knew I wouldn't last long if I didn't find water or some kind of shelter soon. I started walking because what else could I do? Each step felt heavier than the last. my boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Occasionally, I would glance at the horizon, hoping for something, anything, but there was nothing but heat waves and emptiness. Then I saw this black speck in the distance, moving fast across the desert. A truck, a big rig. It was still a few miles out, but I could definitely see it, cutting through the heat like a mirage. For a brief moment, I thought I was hallucinating, that the sun had finally cooked up my brain, but no, it was in fact real. I turned around and faced the oncoming truck, waved my arms around like a madman, hoping to catch the driver's attention. As it got closer, I could hear the deep rumble of the engine, feel the ground shake beneath my feet. The truck honked, a loud blare that echoed across the desert, and I felt a surge of relief as it pulled over onto the shoulder. The driver's door swung open and a man climbed out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and a trucker's cap pulled low over his eyes. He had a cigarette dangling from his lips, and he took a long drag as he sized me up. "You look like you've seen better days," he said through the gravel in his throat. "You need a ride?" I nodded, too exhausted to speak, and he motioned for me to climb in. I hauled myself into the passenger seat, sinking down in the worn leather as the cool air from the AC hit my face immediately. It was like heaven. The driver then climbed back in and shifted the truck into gear, started rolling again, the engine growling beneath us. "Name's Biff," he said, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. "You hitchhiking through the desert or just plain suicidal?" I managed out a weak chuckle, wiping the sweat from my brow. A little of both, I guess. I got stranded. Thanks for stopping, though." Biff shrugged. "It's no problem. I've been out on these roads long enough to know when somebody's in trouble. You can't last long out here, especially without water." We made small talk for a while, as the miles continued to roll by. I started to relax. Biff seemed like a decent guy, a little rough around the edges, but he'd been on the road for years, just like me. He told me about some of the places that he'd been to, weird things that he'd seen, and I shared a few stories of my own. It wasn't long before my exhaustion caught completely up with me, though. I could feel my eyelids growing heavy. "You look beat," Biff said, noticing my struggle to stay awake. "Why don't you take a nap? Heat like this will wear you out faster than you can think." I hesitated for a moment, but the cool air and the hum of the engine were just lulling me off into a trance. I nodded and leaned back in the seat. "Thank you. I'll just close my eyes for a little bit." And I was out. When I woke up, it was dark. The sun was gone and was replaced by this black sky, dotted with stars. The truck was still moving, the engine rumbling steadily, but something was off. I blinked and tried to shake the grogginess from my mind. And that's when I noticed I couldn't move. I glanced down and my heart skipped a beat. I'd been tied into my seat around the waist. I reached down expecting a rope and found thick corded cable instead. I pulled, but it didn't budge. "Wouldn't piss him off if I were you," Biff muttered from the dark. Piss him off? I looked down in horror. Coiled around me was some kind of living seatbelt, almost like a massive snake. Its thick, muscular body was wrapped around my torso and legs, pinning me to my seat. I caught my breath in my throat, panic rising as I tried to wiggle free, but the more I moved, the tighter the snake squeezed. "I see you met Scrooge," Biff said with a grin, his teeth glinting in the dim light of the dashboard. "He's my little travel companion, likes to keep things, well, interesting." My mouth went dry and my heart was hammering. The hell is this? Biff just chuckled, tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "Relax, buddy. Scrooge won't hurt you, not unless you give him a reason to. He's almost like quicksand. The more you struggle, the tighter he gets, so I suggest you stay real still." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The snake's cold, scaly body was pressed up against me, its head resting near my gut. I could feel its slow, rhythmic breathing. a faint hiss of air as it exhaled. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to stay still, just like Biff said. That thing must have been at least 9 feet long. Biff informed me he originally got the snake to keep pests out of the cab, and it was actually a pretty good idea. The problem was that Scrooge grew right, just like he was supposed to, and eventually Biff got the idea to train him a little bit. He glanced over at me, his eyes gleaming with that kind of sick amusement. You ever been scared, kid? I mean, really, really scared. There's something about it, you know? Gets the blood pumping, makes you feel alive. I like to see how far I can push people before they break. I stared at him. You're fucking crazy. Biff laughed, a deep rumbling sound that sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe I just know how to have a good time. Tell you what, you play nice, and I'll let you go. But first, we gotta feed Scrooge. He gets real cranky if he doesn't eat, and trust me, you don't want that. I watched in horror as Biff opened up the glove box and pulled out this plastic sandwich bag. Inside was a dead rat, its body limp and twisted, fur matted with dry blood. Biff dangled it in front of me, grinning like a complete maniac. Go on, he said, his voice low and menacing. Feed him. I shook my head. My stomach was churning. I can't. Oh, you can, Biff interrupted me, his grin widening. But there's a catch. You can't use your hands. My heart sank as I realized what he was saying to me. He wanted me to feed that snake using my mouth. I stared at the rat, my throat tightening. The smell of decay hit me, making me gag. Biff's grin never wavered. I knew he wasn't kidding, and I had no choice. Tears stung my eyes as I leaned forward, my hands trembling. I bit down on that rat's matted fur. A taste of blood and rot filling up my mouth. It was vile, the worst thing I'd ever tasted in my entire life. I could feel that cold, stiff body of the rat against my tongue, and I fought the urge to vomit. The snake stirred, its head lifting slightly as it sniffed at the air. I held the rat out in front of me, praying that it would just take it and let me go. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The snake just stared, its eyes unblinking, its forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. Then slowly, after around 15 minutes, it finally began to move. The coils around my body loosened just a little as the snake slithered forward, its head coming level with mine. I held my breath. The snake opened up its mouth and took the rat in one swift motion. As soon as the snake's jaws closed in around the rat, I yanked myself free, scrambling to unbuckle my seatbelt and throw open the door. Biff cursed, then jammed the brakes while coasting over to the shoulder. I couldn't handle this shit anymore, and as the truck swerved, I tumbled out onto the asphalt. I hit the ground hard, my hands and knees scraped up against rough pavement, but I did not stop. I jumped up and ran, legs pumping, as I heard the truck's engine roar behind me. Biff was laughing, a high-pitched, maniacal sound that echoed throughout the night. Run, boy, run! Then he blared the horn. The truck's headlights blinked off and plunged into the desert darkness. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear the truck, the sound of the engine growing louder as it barreled down the road behind me. I veered off the asphalt, stumbling out into the desert, my breath coming in these ragged gasps. The truck flew past me, so close that I could feel the rush of the air as it nearly clipped me. For hours, I just wandered through the darkness, the taste of that dead rat still in my mouth, Biff's laughter ringing in my ears. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and the only thing I could do was just march on. I came over a bluff, still desperately trying to get the taste of that rat carcass out of my mouth, when I saw some city lights in the distance. Finally, some fucking mercy. I could also see a semi drifting along the highway, its headlights clicking on and off. He was far off now, driving in the opposite direction, but it still scared me to see him. I waited till the truck was gone before making the rest of that walk. For obvious reasons, I did a lot less hitchhiking after that and never got in a big rig again. Thanks for nothing, Biff.
Man, oh man. Biff is one sick son of a bitch. Said that I like to see how scared people get before they break. All right, Biff. Biff's a fucking menace. Why would you need a snake to keep the rodents out of your truck? Like, what the hell you got going on? Why would you have rodents in your truck?
I always thought that love was enough. You know, the kind of love that burns bright enough to make even the bad days feel like nothing more than just a headache. I thought that's what Teddy and I had. He was my high school sweetheart, after all. He could be sweet as pie when he wanted to be, but that's the thing about people. They surprise you, change in ways you don't see coming, especially when you're young and think you got it all figured out. We grew up in a flat little nowhere town inside Kansas, where the heat stuck to your skin like syrup, and the horizon stretched out like it had no end. There wasn't much to do besides drink at a local bar or work for the town's handful of employers. Teddy worked for the local dirt and material yard, hauling gravel and stone all over the country inside his rig, and I worked as a waitress. Sometimes I helped out a little bit at the post office when they needed extra hands. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was ours. Simple. So I thought. That was back in the mid-90s when everything seemed to stand still. No cell phones to track down every minute, no social media posting your business for the world to see. It was just you, the sky, and the road if you wanted it to be. Teddy and I were stuck inside our routine, but things had started to change when he began messing with those gas station energy pills. Back then, they were all the rage among truckers. Legal speed, basically. Teddy liked to laugh about how it kept him awake, alert, able to get more loads done in less time, but I could see the change happening even before he did. He started coming home later and later. He always had that glazed, jittery look in his eyes too, the kind that makes you think of old cartoons with their characters bouncing off the walls. His once slow, easygoing nature was now gone, replaced by this frantic energy that ground his teeth and made his fingers twitch. He was literally always go, 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 and it wore on him in ways that I didn't understand at first. That's when the mood started. His patience had disappeared, replaced only by a short fuse that could spark at the slightest thing. I could drop a dish, he'd explode, screaming about how careless I was. Or I'd ask him how his day was. He'd rant about how nobody understood what it was like to be on the road for hours and hours, just him and his rig against the world. It wasn't long before I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't worth it anymore. Maybe the Teddy that I'd fallen in love with was now gone, replaced by somebody I could no longer recognize. One night, after yet another fight over something I don't even remember, I told him I was done, told him I couldn't live like this anymore, watching him unravel a little more and more each day. He didn't even say a word, just stared at me with that hollow, dead look in his eyes, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. I watched him climb into his truck and peel out of the driveway, almost like the devil was after him. It felt like a sign, and I took the opportunity to pack up my things and throw some clothes and whatever else I needed into a couple of boxes in a duffel bag. I was not sticking around for another one of these mood swings. I was leaving, for good this time. I was just loading up the last box into the trunk of my car when I heard the low rumble of his rig coming down the road. I froze. Before I could even process what was happening, Teddy's truck had pulled up behind me, blocking the driveway. He jumped out, and in a flash, he was on me. "The hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was thick with rage and his breath stank of booze. I didn't have time to answer before he grabbed me and slammed me against the car so hard that the wind was knocked out of me. I fought back, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. His hands were like vice grips as he zip-tied my wrist behind my back. I screamed, hoping somebody would hear, but we lived far out enough that the only ears nearby were the cicadas. "Stop fighting," he growled at me, dragging me across the driveway toward his rig. "You're not going anywhere." I was trying to figure out how this escalated so quickly. One minute I was leaving, and the next I was being thrown in the back of his truck, the trailer looming like the mouth of some beast ready to swallow me whole. He shoved me inside, slammed the door, and then locked it from the outside. The darkness devoured me, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. The engine roared to life, and the truck lurched forward, sending me crashing into the wall. The inside of the trailer was just metal and shadows. No cargo, nothing to cushion the blows, as Teddy swerved onto the main road, his speed increasing with every second. I tried to steady myself, but the motion of the truck threw me around like a rag doll. Every turn sent me sliding into the walls. Every bump had me hitting the floor hard enough to bruise. At some point, my head connected with something metal, and stars exploded behind my eyes. The pain was sharp, searing. I went limp after that, not quite unconscious, but close enough that the world around me faded in and out of focus. That ride seemed to go on forever, too. The roar of the engine, the violent swerving, the way the trailer rattled around like it was coming apart. It all blended together into this endless nightmare. I had no idea where we were going or what plans Teddy had for me, but I knew it wasn't good. After what felt like hours, the truck finally screeched to a stop. The engine idled for a few moments before shutting off. I held my breath, listening as the driver's door opened up and then slammed shut. Footsteps, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel as he made his way to the back of the trailer. The door swung open and there he was, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. He climbed into the trailer, his shadow long and menacing as it stretched across the floor. "You think you can just leave me?" He spat, voice dripping with venom. "You think you're too good for me now, huh?" I tried to speak, to plead with him, but my mouth was dry. My throat felt like snakeskin. Before I could gather the strength to form even words, he was on me again, yanking me to my feet and dragging me towards the open door. "You want out?" he sneered. "Fine, get out." He shoved me hard and I fell, hitting the dirt with a thud that knocked the wind out of me, again. My vision was blurred and I gasped for air, chest heaving as I tried to make sense of what was going on around me. He stood over me, his chest rising and falling with these deep, erratic breaths. He was completely out of control, unhinged. The Teddy that I once knew was long gone, replaced by this monster who barely even resembled the man I love. "I should leave you out here," he said. "See how you like it." I tried to crawl away, but he grabbed my ankle, pulled me back toward him. My head was spinning, the world tilting as I fought to stay conscious. Then without warning, he cracked me in the back of the head. Everything went blurry again. I could hear footsteps, but I couldn't tell if they were coming or going, and then the truck fired up. I was certain that he was just going to run me over, turn me into pulp out there and let the scavengers get me. He didn't though, just rolled in a big arc and went back toward the highway. I just laid there in the dirt, my vision swimming as the world around me went dark. I laid out there unconscious for the next 10 hours. It turned out that Teddy had hit me in the back of the head with his tire bat, gave me a full-on concussion. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the sound of voices, faint and distant at first, but growing closer slowly. I opened up my eyes and saw two figures standing over me. Their faces were blurry in the early morning light. "You okay?" one of them asked me. I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry. I just nodded instead. "We almost ran you over," the other one said. "The hell happened to you?" I didn't have time or the energy to explain, but they didn't need to hear it. They could see the zip ties around my wrist, the bruises, and the dirt caked on my skin. They cut me loose, helped me up to my feet, and offered me a ride back to town. I didn't say a word the whole way. I just stared out the window, numb and exhausted, still tasting the dust and dirt inside my mouth. When we pulled back into town, I went straight to Teddy's house. My car was still there, trunk open, and my half-packed belongings scattered across the driveway. Teddy and his truck were gone, though. I never saw him again. I packed up and stayed with my sister and then got a place of my own. Everybody in town knew what happened, so it took no effort to keep him away from me. Not that he was in town much after that anyway. He worked nonstop, go, 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 like he wanted to, because nobody else could keep up with that. I learned later he died in a wreck a couple of years later. And you know what? I didn't shed a single tear. That was justice in my mind. The law didn't even need to get involved. Didn't have to. Sometimes, monsters take care of themselves.
Well, I have much to say to that. He said got hooked on gas station energy pills. I'm assuming those are those ones you see up out at the register at some of these truck stops. I don't know what's in those. I'm assuming I always assumed it was like caffeine and whatever, like green tea and the things like that that supposed to be like stimulants. Um, I know you get hooked on them if you can get hooked on them, and it's not just elaboration for the story. But holy smokes, I gotta look out for those gas station fucking pills, man. They turn you into a monster. Okay, I guess that was the end of it. The last story in the line. So, what you guys think? Were those better than the ones I ran the other night? I think they're a little bit better. They weren't so formulaic. The voiceover work, uh, I found it very good. It is disconcerting. Like the last story he did was obviously from the perspective of a female, and hearing it in a guy's voice is a little like jarring at first until you fall into the story. You just kind of like ignore that aspect of it. So that's a little jarring. But I guess if you're running a YouTube channel and you're reading stories and doing voiceovers and stuff, you're and you don't want to go the AI route, which I do appreciate the people not going the AI route with it. Um, your options are limited. But I don't want to drag this out. I don't want to make this a super long video. Um, so just what do you guys think? Was it you like this? Do you like the spooky stories at night? Like trucker related stuff? Always want to do trucker related spooky stories at night. But there's something about driving at night, especially like a night like tonight where it's like raining and kind of crappy out and you got the spooky stories going. And one of the reasons I chose this one is because it had the rainy ambient sound and it was only like 45 minutes the entire video. And I'd actually never heard anything from this channel, which I will link in the description um, on whose channel this is. And but yeah, I thought those were some decent stories. They were actually entertaining. Had me kind of engaged and listening to what the outcome was going to be. So I like that. But if you like what I'm doing, trying to do this YouTube trucker thing a little bit different, just kind of like my own way. Not saying it's any better than anybody else's because I've seen some pretty good trucker channels out there. And, this don't, like, I'm just starting this. So I'm figuring it out. And if you're already on board and one of the handful of subscribers I have, then, well, you're here from the very beginning. And if you stick around, I guess you'll see the evolution of this channel and what it could become. I guess that's the words I want to use. But with that, I'm going to call it. I've got hours and hours and hours of driving ahead of me, um, which is super fun, super fun. Maybe I'll stop and get some trucker pills. No, better not. I don't want to be a monster. Right, Emma? We don't want to be monsters, do we, Emma? You're already a monster. She's my monster, though. But if you like the video, consider giving me a thumbs up on it. The subscribe button is free. And if you have something to comment, comment down below. If you don't have something to comment, then still comment down below because it helps me in the algorithm. I'm doing what I can to read and respond to anybody that comments to me. Obviously, I need to be parked somewhere and not in the middle of a work day to be able to pull it up and kind of look at what what people have said or commented. But I would like to continue to do that. So whatever. That's the end of the video. Stay safe out there, drivers.